Welcome to the comprehensive guide for Airtable automations. In my work as an Airtable consultant, I've seen all of the amazing things that you can conjure up with Airtable automations, and I'm excited to share that magic with you in this tutorial. We'll break it down into the following 3 sections. First, we're going to talk about the common use cases, the things that people are most often building automations for. Then we'll talk about the anatomy of an automation, and then we're going to build all those common use cases from scratch. For our tutorial, imagine this setting. You are part of a dynamic team crafting adrenaline-fueled action sports movies, skiing, mountain biking, etc. Your team does everything, producing the content, gathering the footage, editing it into a finished product. You manage each movie product in Airtable. So launching into our common use cases, what can we build to make those workflows easier? I'm going to bucket these into 2 major example categories. The first is sending notifications, and the second is creating and updating records. So examples of sending notifications might be to notify executives via Slack when a project status changes. It could also be sending those same people weekly status updates for all projects via an email. And the last one could be onboarding new team members by just clicking a button which sends them a pre-written email right from your Outlook or Gmail email address. Examples of updating records might be to change a project status to complete when all the assets associated with it have been marked complete. Keeping a change log for changes in video statuses, who updated them and when. Or templatizing your work hours to make it much easier to enter hours for each day of the week. Now, you can also use automations to connect with the outside internet by using webhooks or syncing with outside apps, and I might cover those in a follow-up video, but we're really going to focus on these most common use cases in this tutorial. We are going to build all of the examples on the screen, so feel free to jump to the ones that interest you the most using the video chapters below. So here we are in our example Airtable base, and I should mention that you can download a template of this base with all of the automations already built out in the video description. If you want to follow along, or if we get to the end and you want to use it, it's there. And so the example we're using today is a video production project management base. So we've got a couple fun things. Powder Paradise, I think that's a ski movie. And this looks like mountain biking and surfing. And so this first table is a table of the projects that they're working on, or maybe the movies that they're working on. Next is a list of video assets. So these are the assets that they need to create those movies, those projects. And so there might be multiple assets that you create for each project. Then we've got the team of people working on this, including editors, producers, project leads. We've got a list of work hours so that people can actually log the hours that they've put in on these various projects. And lastly, I have an hours template. We're going to use this later in our automation that automatically creates a week of work hours. So we'll get into that later. And everything we've talked about so far has been in the data layer of this Airtable database. So now we're going to move to the automations layer. And in this automations layer, I actually have already created one automation so that we can look at the basic anatomy of how this is set up. And right off the bat, the first thing to remember is that every automation has a trigger and then at least one action or multiple actions that result from that trigger. So the trigger is what sets off the automation. In this example of what we have here, it's when a project is marked complete. So when a project is marked complete in our database over here in projects, we've got a status here. And if I change this status to complete, that's going to be the trigger. In this case, what I want to do when that happens is I want to notify the project lead. And so I've created a Slack action that is going to send a message to a specific channel and notify that project lead that the project has been marked complete. So any automation has a trigger, and then it has one or more actions. If I go ahead and create a new automation here and click add a trigger, I can see that there are 8 different triggers that we can do. So it can be when record matches conditions, which is the one that we just did, but it could also be when a form is submitted, when someone creates a record, when a record enters a specific view, at a scheduled time. Lots of different ways that we can trigger this. And then in terms of actions, we've got tons of different actions that we can do. So we can send emails, we can send Slack messages, we can create and update records, and then we've even got lots of more specific things like creating Google Docs or sending information to Salesforce and Jira Cloud. Some of these more specific things we're not going to get into today, but we're going to cover all of the most used and most common cases. So now that you've got an overview of kind of how this automation works, I'm actually going to completely delete it and we're going to build it from scratch. So let's go ahead and delete both of these. Got to turn it off to delete it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and paste in the name again. Notify the project lead when the project is complete. It's very important to descriptively name your automations, and it's fun. You get caught up in the moment and you might create a bunch of automations, but when you come back and you need to troubleshoot something, you really want to have a descriptive name, because once you start doing this, you're going to create all kinds of automations. So again, what we want to do for this first automation is to notify our project lead when a project status has been marked complete. So for my trigger, I'm going to say when a record matches conditions. And then the first thing it wants me to do is select the table where this is happening. So I'll select the projects table. And then the conditions are when the project status is complete. So now that we've set up our trigger, we can go ahead and add an action. That action is going to be to send a Slack message. And you can see, again, we're going to configure either the trigger or the action on the right here. And so for this Slack message, I'm going to choose my account. If I needed to connect a new account, I could do that here, but I've already signed in to my Slack account here. And then in Slack, we can either address a specific user or we can send it into a channel. In this case, I'm going to send this into my testing channel. In the message, I want to address the project lead. So in our data, we always designate a project lead here. And so what I want to do is write a message to them. And this is where I want to zoom out for a second, because another really important piece of this is that for every step that we do here, either a trigger or an action, Airtable remembers information about that step, and that information is what we can use to do lots of cool stuff. So in this case, we're sending a message and we want to send it to that project lead, and we have information. We know who the project lead is because we have information about the record that triggered this. So if I'm going to write hi, and then I want to say the name of the project lead, and if I click this little blue button here, it's going to show me all the information that it remembers, which in this case is just the one step before this, when the record matches conditions. And so I can look within that record that triggered it and find the project lead. So I'm going to say, hi, project lead, and then I want to say the name of the project. So again, we'll go back into that same thing. So we'll say project name is complete, exclamation mark. Now that I've written that, I can actually preview it. So let's generate a preview, run the tests, and we can choose one. So it'll present us a list of records that match that condition, meaning projects that have been completed. So I'll pick one of those, and it's going to run that test. And then this is what it looks like. Hi, Riley Peak, Trailblazers is complete. Awesome. Last step for any automation is to turn it on. So once it's on, it will work. And so if I want to say mark Urban Freestyle to be complete, then it should run that automation. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up my Slack window here. And yes, looks like we got a nice notification here saying to Casey Ocean, who is the project lead for Urban Freestyle, saying that it's complete. That's awesome. All right, so now that we've got our first automation out of the way, we're going to do one that's slightly more complex. So what I want to do next is to send a weekly project status update that has a list of all the projects that we're working on and what their status is. And let's mark a couple more of these in progress, so it seems like we actually have some stuff to keep doing. And so in automations, I'm going to go ahead and create a new automation. We'll call this send weekly project status update. And the trigger in this case is going to be at a scheduled time, meaning we want this to send, like, let's say every Friday. So I'm going to go ahead and click at a scheduled time. The interval type is going to be every week. So it'll be every 1 week on Friday. And then let's say at 10 a.m. So now that we've got our trigger set up, we'll add our first action. And so in this case, we are not triggering from a specific record, meaning we don't have any records here to do anything with yet. And so the first thing we need to do is to get the records. And in this case, we want a list of all records. So I'm going to add a new action, and that action is going to be to find records. And on the right here, I'll select the projects table, and then I want to find them based on a condition. And because I want all the projects in the table, I'm going to say where, project name is not empty. So if anything has a name, it's going to show up here. That is going to get me a list of records, and I can actually test this now. So let's go ahead and test the trigger. And then we can go ahead and test that find records action. And we got this nice list here. Next thing I want to do is, so we can actually put a grid just like this into our email, but I want to make sure it's sorted. Maybe we'll sort it by the status so we can see the stuff that's in progress first and then the stuff that's completed. So the next thing I'm going to do is to add a sort list action. And this is where we get to see our kind of like the different memory steps here that we can use in our sort list. So in this case, the sort list automation takes a list to sort, and so I'm going to select that. And when I click that to select it, I see the two previous steps here and the information about them. So I can click on the find records action and then click that list that we got from that action. And then I can choose how I'm going to sort it. So in this case, I'm going to sort it by the status. And let's go and test that. Great. So now it's sorted them. And we don't need to test every action. We can just keep on trucking, but often testing is helpful to, make sure things are working. So lastly, we are going to send our email. And Airtable lets us send email from like an official @airtable.com email address. It also lets us send email from our own Gmail account or our own Outlook account. In this case, I'm going to do the official Airtable. And so we'll go ahead and send an email. So let's make this to info@3rings.co. And the subject, let's see, end of week project statuses. And then in our email, I'm going to say, here's the status of all of our projects. And then I want to insert that list of projects. So I'm going to go ahead and click the plus here. And then I will click that list, right? That's the list I want to take, the sorted list. And then I want to insert all records as a grid. And then I can choose which fields. So let's say I want the project name. Let's take the start and end date. status and the project lead. Insert. And if I go ahead and generate a preview of that, then I can see email to info@3rings.co. It's going to say, here's the status of all of our projects. And then it's got a nice little list that's sorted, I guess, so that complete is on top. So if we want to complete on bottom, we could always change that by going to our list. Switch this from last to first. And now we've got complete on the bottom. All right, we're moving right along. I'm going to turn this one on. And every Friday at 10 a.m., it's going to send out that email. All right, I want to do one more notification style automation. And this one will be an onboarding email so that when someone gets added to our video production team, we can have like a pre-formatted email that just gets sent out. All we have to do is click a button and it automatically sends. So in our data layer here, I'm now going to go to the team table. So here's our team of people. And I created a checkbox over here called send onboarding email. So what I want to happen is if I check this box here, an email goes out to this specific person, to their email address. And I also want it to come from me, like from my actual email address. And then, information about what resources they have access to, maybe a link to this actual Airtable base. So going into automations here, we're going to create a new automation. And we'll call this onboard new team member. And so our trigger, like we discussed, will be when a record matches conditions. And in this case, it's going to be in the team table when send onboarding email is checked. Now we can add an action, and our action is going to be Gmail, send an email. And we'll go and I'll select my Gmail account here, again, that I've already logged into, but if you need to, you can connect a new Gmail account. And in the to field, I'm going to look for the email address of that team member. So in that trigger, we're now looking in the record for that team member, since that's what triggered this with the checkbox. And in there, I can see their email address. And again, that's because in the data layer, in the team table, we've got a email field. So back here, I can give it a subject, copy and paste these in to save us time. I'm a slow typer. So welcome to the video production team. And then the message, we want to say, hi, use their name. Then you've been added to our video production system. And then we want to give them a link to this video production system so they can get right into it. So we'll say hi, and then we want to get their name. So we'll go in here and find their name, comma, and I'm going to say you've been officially added to our production system. To view our projects, visit, and this is where we want to put the link. And so when we're writing emails, any email, whether it's from Gmail, Outlook, or from Airtable, we can use the markdown formatting of language to add bolded text, italics, or even more advanced things like hyperlinks, which I always love to use because it makes a much cleaner email. So the way that we do that for a hyperlink is we put the text that we want to show within brackets and then the link within parentheses. So the text that I want is just going to say this link. So it'll say, you've been officially added to our production system. To view our projects, visit this link. And then the link is going to be the link to this Airtable base. So let's go ahead and let's see, what do we want? I guess let's grab the team table. So it'll bring them right to the team table. So I'm just taking the URL of the team table, and then I will go ahead and paste that into those parentheses there. And if I go ahead and generate a preview, I'll choose Taylor Smith as an example. And now we can see this email is going to go from my personal email address to Taylor Smith. And we've got this nice little hyperlink here. To view our projects, visit this link. And if I click that link, it brings us right to the Airtable base. That's it. Let's turn it on. All right, I think that we've done a pretty good job of going through the notification style automations within Airtable. So what I want to move to next is creating, updating records. There are so many powerful use cases when we use these other tools available to us in Airtable. So the first one I want to do is changing a status. So in the data layer here, we can see that we've got all these video assets, and each of them is associated with a project. So for example, for the Trailblazers project, we've got Surfing Coastal Waters, and then we've also got the Mountain Madness trailer. Both of those things are being created for this specific project. And what I want to do is I want to update the project status to be complete if all of the video assets that are used in it are complete. So in this case, they are right now, but let's go ahead and mark one of them to be in progress. And in the projects, I actually already created a roll-up field, this one, which is called All Assets Complete. And what it does is it looks at all of the linked video assets and specifically their status. And then because a roll-up is going to aggregate all of the statuses of the associated video assets, I'm going to look at a unique array, meaning like a comma separated list of the values that are returned. So in this case, it's going to have a list of those, all the statuses for those two assets, right? One of them is in progress, one of them is complete. And so what it's going to return in this case is in progress, comma, complete. But if they were both complete, because it's only showing unique values, it would just show complete. So when they're both complete, this will equal the text complete. And if that's true, it's going to output yes. Otherwise, it's going to output no. So in this case, Trailblazers says no, because we know one of them's in progress. But if I were to go ahead and move this asset to be complete and go back, now I can see Trailblazers, all assets are complete. So when that happens, I want Airtable to automatically mark the project status as complete. And the way we're going to do that is with an automation. So back into our automations here, let's go ahead and create a new automation. This one is going to be called changed status to complete when assets are finished. And the trigger is going to be when that all assets completed status changes to yes. So we'll do when record matches conditions. And then in the projects table, we want to find that roll up here, all assets complete. And we'll say when all assets complete is yes. So that's our trigger. And then the action is going to be changing the status to complete. So I'll go in here and I want to update the record. So where is that record? It's in projects. And then the project ID is from that trigger, the record ID. And then the field I want to update is the status field. So I'll pick the status field here and I want to mark that as complete. So that's it. Let's just turn it on. And then if I go back into the data layer here, let's look at one that's not marked complete yet. So that would be, let's say, Urban Freestyle. Currently, not all the assets are complete, and currently the status is in progress. Now if I go over to the video assets here and look for anything that says that's linked to that Urban Freestyle project, I've got this one here. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this as complete. Go over here, and there's our automation, marking it to complete. Awesome. Now, it's worth mentioning that the automation does not work retroactively. So in the case of wave riders, all assets were already complete before we turn that automation on. And so it's not going to change that. But if I were to go back into here and, change one of these back into review and then back to complete, then we'll get that to work over there. All right, moving on, we're going to make this, again, slightly more complex, but one use case that I see people using all the time that's super nice, and that is to have a change log like this here. And so for each project, we want to see when statuses are changed, who did it, when did they do it, which asset was it. And so basically we're creating our own change log here that's just going to log that information every time. And the automation itself for this really is not any more complicated than the one we just built, but the setup is a little more complicated because we have to kind of set ourselves up to have that text that's saying exactly what we want it to say. So if I go into the video assets here, I can see that I've got this little changelog helper field that I've created. This is a formula. And what it does is it takes the date that the status was last modified. So if I change one of these from complete to in progress, or probably the other way around, it will say the date the last time that was changed. And then it's going to say who last modified that. And that's using this last modified field type that we've also created. And then it's going to say the name of the asset. And then it's going to say the status that it's been changed to, or really just the status that it is. But in this case, that also is the status that it was changed to. So doing that, we get this one line that looks like that. But what we want is to aggregate this so that we can see every time that happened for any asset that's associated with a specific project. So the other thing we need is I've created another rollup that pulls in the project name. So it just looks at the project table and any project that's linked to the asset, and there should only be one project. The asset should only be assigned to one project at a time. We're going to go ahead and look at the name of that project and then pull that in. And this last little bit I put here is because technically what the rollup is providing here is an array, which is a comma separated list of values, but Airtable views it as an array. I then added an ampersand and quotations with nothing in it. So I'm adding a blank space to the end, but what it does is it forces Airtable to view it as text, which is important because in the projects table, this project name is text, and it can only compare things that have the same type. So now that we've got that set up, I'm going to go ahead and go into automations. I'll create a new automation, and I'm going to call this update changelog. And in this case, we want our trigger to be when that helper field that has the information about what changed, when that updates, because that's going to update every time a status is changed. So let's say when a record is updated in the video assets table, and we could choose a view within it, but I'm not going to, we don't need to. And so now I want to see when that changelog helper is updated. So we can pick a specific field and just watch when that field is updated. So now that we've got that trigger for that status update, we need to find the project that's associated with it, because the project is what's going to hold the changelog. And so we need to grab that project so that we can then put the new status into it. So let's go ahead and find records in the projects table. And we're going to find the baseline condition. And then the condition is going to be when project name is, I guess contains would work. Is should also work. And we're going to switch this. So static would mean that we could just type text in here. That would be static. But what we want is dynamic, meaning we want to use the information from the previous step. So I'm going to switch it to dynamic. And then I can go and find that project name rollup. So when the project name matches, we'll know that we found the right project. And so now we're going to update the record. So let's make an update record action. This is going to be in the projects table. And then we'll go ahead and when we choose, so we're now choosing which project we're going to update. So from the find record step, we can go ahead and we're actually going to make a list of record ID. And the reason why it's making a new list is because technically when you do a find records, you might get multiple matches. And Airtable doesn't know whether we're going to get multiple matches or not. And actually, in our case, if you named two projects the same name, you would get two. And that would kind of break our automation here. So if you were going to potentially have multiple projects with the same name, we'd probably set this up a little bit differently. But in this case, I'm going to assume no project is ever named the same. And so I can go ahead and put my ID for that project in here. And then the field I want to update is that asset change log. So within the asset change log, first I'm going to put in from that first record the new status change. So that's my change log helper field that says like this person changed the status to this on this date. And then if I hold shift and enter, I can make a new line here. And then I want to drop in the old log. So whatever statuses had already been logged there. And so I'm going to go into the project and find field values here. And then we'll find the asset change log. And again, it's saying list because if we had multiple projects that we had found, it would list the change logs for multiple projects. In this case, we know we're only going to have one project. So what this is going to do is it's going to list the newest change first and then all the old changes below. And that's it. If I turn this on, let's test it out. So I'm going to go into here and let's say for one that's not complete yet. So looking at the Powder Paradise project here, if I look in the change log, I've got some old updates here that say I changed one of the assets to be in progress. I changed another one to be complete. The one that I changed in progress is the Mountain Madness raw footage. So let's go change that to be complete. So in here, find the asset. I'm going to change that to complete. And then go over here. And our other automation ran to make this status complete since all the assets for that project are complete. But then we saw that nice little green box that means that it went ahead and stamped in that on today, July 31st, I changed the status of Madness raw footage to be complete. All right, we are trucking along here. There's only one more automation I want to show you today, and it highlights some more advanced things that we can do with automation actions that are super powerful. So this one is going to be, I actually foreshadowed it at the beginning, it's going to be using our hours template here to automatically create, when you check a box, to automatically create a Monday through Friday schedule of hours that then you could more easily go and tweak and say, oh, actually I came in at 9:30, I left at 6, whatever. But it gives you a place to start so that you don't have to create every week a list of the days that you already knew you were going to work. So the setup that I've done in order to make this be able to happen is we've got this hours template here. And the way this thing works is if you create a new record here, so let's say I'm going to make this Saturday. I've got these formulas that look at the day of the week and they find the next Monday, and then they'll find the next instance of whatever day you wrote here. after next Monday. And so basically it's designed to do, to set up next week for you. So you'd want to do this, maybe on a Sunday or maybe on a Friday before the next week so you can get all this set up. If you want to use this formula, that'll be included in the template as well. So you can just go, in here and copy and paste that into your own base if you're making your own. In this example, I don't think we want a Saturday, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And then the other piece of setup that I want to show you is just that we've got this work hours table. And so this is where we're actually going to create those work hours records. And so it's got a start time and a stop time, the name of the team member who's recording those hours, calculates the total hours worked based on the start and the stop time, and then you can add notes for what you did. So in our automations here, I'm going to create a new automation. Let's call it make this week's hours. And the trigger, I want to actually trigger this by a checkbox so that people can choose to automatically create these. We could also schedule it. But so in our data here, in the team table, I have a checkbox that says generate work hours. So when I check this box, I want it to create hours for the next week. So let's go ahead and add a trigger when record matches conditions in the team table, and then we can find that checkbox. Generate work hours is checked. And now the first thing I want to do actually is to uncheck that box so that it's not checked the next time we want to use it. So I'm going to go ahead and create an update record action for the team table. The record I want to update is that record that triggered the first step. And then the field I want to update is generate work hours, and I want it to be unchecked. So I've done that. Now I want to find those template hours. So that list of templated hours for the next week. So let's create a find records action. And we'll go ahead and look in that hours template table. And we'll find them based on condition. And the condition is going to be when at 9 a.m. is not empty, meaning it has a start time. So it'll grab all of the records that are in that table. Okay, and now is where we get into our new action here. And you can see these two options are right at the top, but I haven't mentioned them at all yet. So these are more advanced actions that you can do within an Airtable automation. One is conditional logic. And what conditional logic means is we could say, only run this action if we meet certain conditions. For example, maybe only run this action if next week is not a holiday, if you were tracking holidays in the base. Or in our previous steps, only mark a project complete if all the assets are complete, but also if this person signed off on it, something like that. So we can add conditional logic into our automations. But in this case, what we want is actually a repeating group. And so a repeating group means that we can take a list. In this case, we found a list of records, and we can actually perform an action for each thing in that list. So I'm going to go ahead and click this. And the first thing that I do is choose the list. So I can select my input list here, and I'm going to choose the find records list. So now that I've got that list, and it's going to be that list of 5 days and start and stop times for those days, I can add an action, and my action is going to be to create a record. So I'll create the record in the work hours table. And within that work hours table, I want to specify the team member because that person checked a box to generate hours for them. So I can go and look in the trigger and find the record ID for that trigger, meaning that person's record ID. And then the next thing I want to do is add a start time. And so the start time, we'll make it dynamic. And then we'll choose, you can see here, we've got our previous steps, but then we've also got this option that is the current item, which means in that list, it's the current item that we are repeating through in that list. So we'll click the current item, and then we want the start time for that current item, which is going to be, that date at 9 a.m. And then let's do the stop time. And so we'll make it dynamic. We'll choose the current item, and then we'll do at 5 p.m. So that's the whole setup. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. And then if I go into my data layer here, I can see in work hours right now, I just have some hours for Alex Johnson. So let's pick someone else and make hours for them. So I'm going to go into the team table and let's generate work hours for Jordan Brown. So click the checkbox there, and hopefully we'll see a bunch of hours get created. There it is. So we've got Jordan Brown, 8/5, which is next Monday, and they're not sorted. So let's go ahead and sort them by the start time. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If you made it this far, it means that you are well on your way to being an automation wizard in Airtable. You understand the basic anatomy of an automation, the trigger and the actions. You know that most automations people create fall into two major categories, either sending notifications or creating or updating records. And hopefully by seeing all of the examples in the tutorial, you have some ideas for how you can automate your own workflows based on some of those use cases. So don't forget that you can download the template that I created for this video through the video description link below. And if you would like more customized support for your team, I also offer professional services, and you can learn about those in the video description as well. So thanks so much for watching. Happy building, and I will see you next time.